This is the December 20th, 2010 issue of United Nations Week News and Views. My name is John Kerry, and the purpose of the program is to bring to your attention information about recent events at the UN that you probably will not come across anywhere else. The views expressed are mine alone unless I indicate some other source, and I'm responsible even in that situation. Last week we explained something about the qualifications, the superb qualifications of our #1 ambassador at the UN, Susan Rice. Now I want to tell you about a meeting that she co-hosted at the White House on December 13th. Guests were representatives of the 15 current members of the UN Security Council, plus the 5 countries that will begin 2-year terms next month. President Obama was there, and he began by congratulating the new members and underscoring the importance of the UN and the Security Council to the United States. In particular, he stressed the importance of the Security Council remaining united in urging all parties to the Comprehensive Peace Agreement on Sudan to abide by their commitments, particularly in light of the upcoming referendum scheduled for next month, January. President Obama also underscored the importance of continued Security Council support for non-proliferation, building on the strong work that has been done to hold North Korea and Iran to their commitments and hold them accountable for failure to live up to those commitments. The President noted the broader role the Security Council has in supporting peace, security, and development around the world. Mr. Obama then led a discussion that covered a wide range of issues facing the Council, including nuclear non-proliferation, the Middle East, Haiti, Somalia, Sudan, Iran, North Korea, and our shared efforts to combat terrorism. The foreign diplomats present were from Austria, Bosnia, Brazil, China, Colombia, France, Gabon, Germany, India, Japan, Lebanon, Mexico, Nigeria, Portugal, Russia, South Africa, Turkey, Uganda, and the United Kingdom. Now I turn to an interreligious dialogue, U.S. and Indonesia. Back on November 30th, Ambassador Rice had held an interreligious dialogue with the Indonesian ambassador Kleib, K-L-E-I-B, and with Dr. William Findley of Religions for Peace. Rice referred to, quote, the inspiring first U.S.-Indonesia interfaith dialogue, which took place last January in Jakarta. That was a very important step. A bilateral interfaith working group specifically guided by a deeply American principle that is also deeply Indonesian principle. We believe, as President Obama put it in his historic speech in Cairo last year, that faith can be a force for partnership and healing rather than a pretext for division. I have here the text of President Obama's Cairo statement. I just want to read a couple of sentences. He says, all of us have a responsibility to work for the day when the mothers of Israelis and Palestinians can see their children grow up without fear. When the Holy Land of the three great faiths is the place of peace what God intended it to be. When Jerusalem is a secure and lasting home for Jews, Christians, and Muslims, and a place for all the children of Abraham to mingle peacefully together, as in the story of Israel, when Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad, peace be among them, joined in prayer. Well, Ambassador Rice noted that, quote, the United States and Indonesia are the world's second and third most populous democracies, and we are 2 of the most diverse nations on earth. We are home to Christians and Buddhists, to Muslims, Jews, and Hindus, and others. Our communities retain their individual beliefs, but they share a common commitment to the health and well-being of all communities. On December 16th, Ambassador Rice made two significant speeches, one on women, peace, and security, and the other announcing U.S. support for the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Here in the United States, that refers to Native Americans or Indians, as they're called. Here is some of what she said on women, quote, "We're gathered because we all agree on the importance of addressing an issue that cries out for the world's conscience, and that is sexual violence in conflict. We agree that the challenge is urgent and immense. The human cost is all too real. Armed conflicts," said Ambassador Rice, "continue to have a devastating impact, particularly on women and girls. Rape, sexual assault, and gender-based violence are all too often used deliberately and cynically as a weapon of war. And the fight to end sexual violence has yet to be universally recognized as central in securing international peace and security." Continuing, Ambassador Rice said, "Some still think that sexual violence is somehow a natural accompaniment of conflict. It is not. As the Secretary General's report notes, quote, "The myth that rape is an inevitable byproduct of war is persistent and dangerously self-fulfilling," unquote, from the Secretary General. Rice says, "I hope that this session, in some small way, will put an end to that myth and channel our shared commitment to confront and combat sexual violence and take concrete actions that improve the fate of women and girls." Rice went on to say the United States commends the United Nations, especially UN Action, for its leadership in finding effective ways to address this problem. We have been encouraged by the UN's response and follow-up to the appalling August attacks in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, including additional steps it's taken to build mission-wide strategies to better protect civilians. Rice went on, quote, "The UN has increased random patrols, recruited more female peacekeepers, and improved communications. It is also employing scenario-based training for peacekeepers to help combat sexual violence. But obviously more must still be done. We hope the UN will continue to identify women's protection advisors and put them in more peacekeeping operations and complete gaps in analysis of UN protection strategies. Quote, "We must also shine the international spotlight on the perpetrators and use this mechanism to inform targeted actions by this Council and by member states. With improved information, the UN will be able to assist states to respond more robustly to these crimes. As in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, after the Walikale rapes, we expect our actions will spur commanding officers to turn those who commit sexual violence over to the authorities to be brought to justice," unquote. Finally, here is Ambassador Rice's announcement on indigenous peoples' rights. Quote, "Today I join President Obama in underscoring the United States' support for the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. The Declaration is a milestone in the international community's efforts to identify and address the needs of indigenous peoples around the world, to protect their ways of life, and to help their communities to flourish. After a thorough review, the United States is pleased to join more than 140 countries in support of this declaration. As the President himself recently said, we believe that, quote, together we can advance the arc of human progress toward a more perfect union and a more perfect world, one in which each human being lives with dignity, security, and equality. The official announcement of U.S. support included this, quote, in September '07, at the United Nations, 143 countries voted in favor of the declaration. The United States did not. Today, in response to the many calls from Native Americans throughout the country, and in order to further U.S. policy on indigenous issues, President Obama announced that the United States has changed its position. The United States supports the declaration, which, while not legally binding or a statement of current international law, has both moral and political force, unquote, from the President. The reasons why the United States did not, for over 3 years, support the declaration may be guessed at, and I will guess at them. Foremost is the possibility that a declaration may in time become legally binding. The prime example of this is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights adopted by the General Assembly in 1948, which by now, and long since actually, has been recognized by legal scholars as having the force of law as rules of customary international law. The way it works is that if there is a principle out there and countries in general approve of it and act by it, in time it becomes binding as a so-called rule of customary international law. Well, that should be fine with us as to the new declaration, as long as the text raises no problems, but it does. Article 19 provides that, quote, states shall consult and cooperate in good faith with the indigenous peoples concerned through their own representative institutions. Now listen to this. In order to obtain their free, prior, and informed consent before adopting and implementing legislative or administrative measures that may affect them, unquote. This may seem to give a veto power to such peoples. Now, the language is ambiguous. It says that the government shall negotiate in order to obtain consent. Well, if all that means is governments have to negotiate, and they don't have to stop what they'd like to do if they don't get the consent, well, that's just another way of looking at it. The language is, at best, poorly drafted because of the ambiguity, but then sometimes we build in ambiguities on purpose. Article 26, subparagraph 1 says that, quote, indigenous peoples have the right to the lands, territories, and resources which they have traditionally owned, occupied, or otherwise used or acquired, unquote. This could mean the ousting of good faith purchasers of land previously occupied by indigenous peoples. And finally, Article 32, sub 2, requires good faith consultation with such peoples, quote, again, in order to obtain their free and informed consent prior to the approval of any project affecting their lands or territories and other resources, unquote. This may simply, again, be imprecise drafting, but it could be taken to mean that nothing affecting such people's lands could be done without their consent. Small wonder, then, in view of these, at best, ambiguities, that earlier U.S. leaders withheld American approval of the Declaration on Indigenous Peoples' Rights. Well, friends, that's all for this December 20th issue of United Nations Week, News and Views. We'll be back with the next issue. Meantime, do send along your own ideas on these or other UN-related issues to our blog, www.unweek.blogspot.com. Thank you very much for watching. Goodbye for now. Merry Christmas, and we'll see you next week.